Every successful person got there by going through tough times. Success is a hard-ass teacher who likes to knock you around along that journey. You know, it takes real guts to not give up and keep going. We'll hear stories about failures and how these leaders flip the script to create success. I'm John Schultz. Join me and let's discover how success is never really overnight. So welcome to the John Schultz podcast, everyone. We have a great guest today, Lisa Picard. Very excited to have her on. Amazing career and still going. Lots of energy flowing through Lisa. She's a partner at Sway Ventures right now. And Sway Ventures is a US-based venture capital firm that backs industry disrupting founders from inception to exit. Love the word exit. Haven't had many myself, but I'm glad that's in your tagline because that's very important. A 25-year career in nearly every area of real estate, from developing $8 billion worth of projects, which is a tremendous amount. Those are very large-scale projects, very complicated. So I'm sure you learned a lot. A few former roles is CEO of EQ Office, which is Blackstone's CRE platform company. An EVP at Skanska, a gigantic development company. The one I like the most is you worked at Canyon Ranch Spa, because I love Canyon Ranch Spa. That must have been fun. And also Heinz. And, you know, besides having a great career, you're very smart. You have 2 MIT degrees, not just one. I wish I even had just one. And masters in city planning and urban design and economic development. And in 2021, which is, you know, obviously very recent, you were Business Journal's commercial real estate innovator. I'm glad it didn't say technologist, right? Innovator's better. We're all technologists. So welcome to the show, and thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
All right, this is gonna be a good one. So love to really learn a little bit about you when you were young, right? Because I think it's so fun to learn about like why people do what they do. So how would you describe yourself growing up?
Gosh, I think an Angelino, so born of parents who were children of the Depression. Believe it or not, my dad was 50 when I was born. He was actually a World War II vet in Normandy, and so I kind of, I think, from a very young age, I learned to be very incredibly resourceful because. Children of the Depression, you sort of like learn to eat an apple core, you learn to eat chicken bones, like you don't let anything go to waste. And, I grew up in sort of the former orange groves of California in just outside of Los Angeles, kind of on the border of Orange County. And my father was a manufacturing tool engineer for Northrop. And he designed tools to sort of, build the rocket ships and special planes that the aerospace engineers were, dreaming up. And so there was always this sort of like wonder and creativity and problem solving that was kind of like around me. But I think, fundamentally, I was just enamored by cities, and LA is a big one. And we traveled a ton up and down the coast. And so I had a ton of wonder around cities. And I think, from that very early age, just, watching how the width of the sidewalk influenced, my persona and how it made me feel. And what if we could make them wider, or what if we could, front different things on it? So my mom naturally encouraged me to sort of explore city urban design. And that actually ended up becoming my undergrad. So that was probably...
When I was young, I was asking my parents, like, where's the closest candy store, right? Like, you're like literally like focusing on design. It's amazing, because you traveled, you had this ability to see all different things and form, your sort of forward thinking, which is so cool. So what was your first job that you took on?
I mean, maybe this is a little bit indication because I'm a little bit of a health freak, but, I worked at a salad bar, a local salad bar, prepping all kinds of foods, whether it be, all different kinds of, things. But I think the first real job, while I was in college was actually doing urban planning, urban design. And I was, 19 at the time because I wanted to kind of work in the profession. And we were doing master plan designs for the Irvine company. So we were laying out like, golf course layouts. We were laying out new communities. We were laying out, all kinds of things that were going to eventually become the extension of Irvine. And it was pretty fun. It was pretty fun to kind of think what if, right, in terms of laying all this stuff out. But I think ultimately I was realizing these people called developers were ultimately, they were looking at some other dynamic that was reshaping whatever plans and designs that we were sort of coming up with. And they knew something I didn't know. And that sort of really, pushed and drove me to really get deep into finance and also spreadsheets, and it also fostered my desire to go back to grad school and add real estate finance in addition to, urban economics, because I felt as though, money is the driver of all things. And if anything, I kind of tell young people who are in school, even if they're studying art history, I go take finance too, because the fact of the matter is the world runs on money and it's controlled by money, and you need money to do everything. Fortunately, so if you understand how that thinks, you can meet these other objectives, because I think finance is not a thing in and of itself. It is to augment other things that you want to do in this world. So
I agree. A lot of times I'm saying lately, like, learn how to code too, right? Like, learn. I feel like you need to learn what's a functional way to actually make money, or have a job in this changing environment, which we've seen like dramatically change. So your first project then, like, obviously it was an urban design. What was your first project?
Wow. Let's see. Probably the most, I guess the first project from an urban design perspective was actually doing this golf course community that was just outside of the city of Irvine. And it was sort of, and I had actually played golf in high school. I was on the guys' golf team. And so I knew the game, and I knew sort of slope ratings and all of these sort of things. But it was this project to sort of figure out, how do you actually maximize the visibility of the homes, because the homes actually, I did learn this, the homes actually pay for the golf course. The golf course never pays for itself. So how do you actually balance the tensions between sort of the layout of the holes that give a really pretty, phenomenal golfers experience, and also maximize the value and the perspectives, offered to the homes that are sort of adjacent to it. And so, I think it was super rewarding to sort of see the tensions kind of play out in that first project, and then watch it get built, right? And see the reality. And these things always take, more time than you actually think when you sort of envision them, and you envision their purpose, and you envision sort of what's possible. And watching it sort of come together, I think, in that first sort of, early years of, being 19, 20 years old, and seeing that I could actually read plans and describe plans and really start to visualize them in physical presence, all the way up into this present day, whether it's, designing a high rise in Seattle, or it's a hotel complex on the beach in Miami, these kinds of things, being able to kind of really start to feel the experience, because I was already deeply connected to the outside environment. I've always thought like our world and the places that we sort of go and experience is sort of like art in its biggest form. And so if you're people that are going to work in real estate, and people that are going to work on the landscape, we're really influencing the persona of the people who are going to engage with the asset. And so I've always had that perspective because of my experience as a child, and in these early experiences doing urban design work.
Well, you're ahead of your time, because think about it, right? I mean, until the last 10 years, everything's been so commoditized. I mean, maybe because I'm in the Northeast and most of what I do is in the Northeast, and it's older, right? So it's more redevelopment. Obviously I remember going to like, Naples or Atlanta, and, everything looks so new and much better designed. But, I guess from where you were, you grasped that and you took a liking to it. So how did you get in with Skanska? What made you choose what you chose in that direction? And what were some of the obstacles to get there?
It's a great trajectory, because I think, the first opportunity to kind of really work in development. I mean, first I worked in investment advising because I really needed to understand how money worked, right? And so from soup to nuts to buying assets, to like working those assets, to actually selling those assets and communicating to an investor, as a fiduciary, how this is performing. It then, set me up to actually become a very effective developer. And, I knew, like, going to work for Hines, I would live amongst the best and sort of learn the tricks of the trade, from really some skilled professionals, that led me into developing probably over, 2 million square feet of build to suit assets for tech companies in Seattle. And, then we had the great dot-com bomb, which, had me unleasing assets that I leased. And it's a phenomenal experience, because I think if we look at sort of professionals today who may have like nearly 14 years of experience, they've never had to do an undoing yet, Oh
my God, the undoing. It sounds like we're going into a new movie, which we are, right? It's going to be like a freaking new movie.
Totally. And so that process of building up, and sort of thinking that, like, no, it goes flat and then you got to build up again. No, you have this undoing you have to do. And that undoing makes you such an incredibly skilled professional in the redoing later on, right? Because you sort of really protect the investor's capital, you protect yourself, you have a memory about like what it takes. And that was a really important experience for me, to kind of go through the dot-com bubble in a market that really got overbuilt, not dissimilar to San Francisco. And it was going to take 10 years to kind of like work its way out because of the oversupply in that market. Then I kind of found myself magically moving into the hospitality market and working for Canyon Ranch and being their head of real estate at a time that they were doing a transition of really expanding the brand. And this was like, at first I was like, this is just a crazy move. Why the hell am I doing this? This is insanity. I've been spending my career building office buildings. Why am I going to go work in this asset class that has a vacancy every night? It's crazy, right? But I will tell you,
but they have a spot. Amazing. There's pluses too, I think, right?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, I mean, I lived at a spa for basically 6 months before I actually got my own housing. But this whole notion of like hospitality was really going to enter into every asset class, because as consumers, we were moving into this era of like really demanding experience, because the commodity transaction was mostly being moved to a digital experience. And so anything that was going to be in person, I mean, and we're seeing this shift happen in the office market too. Anything that's sort of just transactional or can be done remotely is done remotely in an asynchronous way, and done with technology. And so anything that is done in a synchronous way needs to be experiential. And I think that happened in retail. It certainly was moving into multifamily. And so that whole vibe of sort of the front end really shaped my whole perspective about the shift in the office market. And that really will bring me into Skanska, because when I joined Skanska, it's really sort of a unique opportunity. They approached me and said, hey, please help us grow and expand the West Coast. And I said, look, I've had the corporate gig. I'm not sure I want this again. They said, no, come on board. You need to know that we are, financing all of this stuff ourselves. We finance this off our balance sheet. There's no debt. There's no equity outside equity. And I was like, wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute. No lender, no LPs. It's just Skanska. And
wow.
And I was like, okay, wait a minute. If we're building in Seattle, I need to make sure I'm on the investment committee, because I need to be able to decide like I know that market,
Right.
And the executive at the time looked at me and said, well, Lisa, like, who else is going to make the decision? You're making the decision. I was like, oh my God.
That sounds like a dream. I mean, like, it's a dream, right?
So, I mean, and if you think about real estate, like, we don't have big shift increment. We have incremental changes, because essentially the way we manage risk is we look at everything that's been built before us. And we do like a little bit of a shift on that with like changing market times. And so we don't have really huge innovation in real estate, because our lenders, our LPs all expect us to build what's been built before.
Yeah.
So this to me was like this masterful opportunity to really reshape the market. And I did. I took a team, and in Seattle, I like, for example, there's an office building called 400 Fairview, and people who are in Seattle will know it is the office building that has M Bar, this really sort of famous restaurant on the top. And who does that, right? But we basically got rid of the office lobby. I was like, the office lobby is not needed anymore today. It's no longer, we don't need statements of the corporation. We need a statement of community at the base of a building. And so if people could work in the neighborhoods, they would love to work in the neighborhood. So let's bring neighborhood to the city. So we basically, built this plinth of a ground floor that was probably 20 feet in height, like 2.5 stories tall, and built a market, on the base of it, of just sort of curated neighborhood type styled retail. It was in this industrial flavor way before anybody else was really doing it. And it changed the market. And it also, we did it because we were saying, look, we got to give talent an amazing place to work, because talent is,
think about it. I mean, this is a while ago. I mean, you were definitely way ahead of it. I mean,
this was like 2011 we were doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's very forward thinking. But all you did was felt what you wanted to feel for yourself, right? I mean, it's not that hard if you're actually willing to try something new. I mean, I always say Starbucks was the first co-working space, right? Because you felt so comfortable going in there with your laptop, and you finally had mobility to do it, right? And you could sit there all day and get your work done, but feel like you're not stuck in some cubicle somewhere, right? So, yeah.
And we did this to attract the best companies, into Seattle. It was sort of like this statement of attract the best talent. And at the end of the day, I wanted people to walk by the building and say, who gets to work here, right?
I love
who
that.
gets to work here, right? And so we thought we'd get tech company after tech company after tech company. And what did we get? We got Tommy Bahamas, they had their headquarters. So, an apparel merchandise. We got an insurance company. We got, a company that basically does hardware for automobiles. So we got all of these other ants. And why? Because they were all struggling with talent. They weren't sexy enough to attract talent. And they were competing with Amazon. They were competing with all these other companies. So it really created a remarkable asset on the civic landscape that really reshaped the way in which Amazon was building all of their towers. So they started to actually curate the ground floor of these environments to really change the city. And so we did a couple of different assets in that market. And, lo and behold, John Gray reportedly walks through 400 Fairview and goes, oh my God. We need people who know how to do this, right? They had giant portfolio of assets that, were challenged across, the US, and they weren't as sexy and they weren't as able to attract talent. And so they needed an edge. They needed a way to really reshape the real estate, rethink the real estate across the portfolio. And, 2015 is sort of I think a magic time of where we really started to see the growth of the workforce start to decline. And so the pressure on office assets really started to kind of increase after 2015. And then you had this company called WeWork in 2018 that really supercharged, I think, the market to build, oversupply the market, because they were sort of fictitiously.
They were the stimulus program for real estate, really.
Yeah,
they were,
exactly.
that was our form of stimulus that, and others.
Right.
I mean, you had other co-working companies that were overexpanding too.
Right. And you had a VC community that was basically paying for their losses to essentially go after and, shape this space, and whether or not there was going to be sort of a long-term capture. I do think that, we don't have an office product that really was tied to sort of the scalability of companies and how companies are thinking about it, because most companies couldn't tell you how big or where they're going to be in 3 years, and yet we require them to sign a 10-year lease. And so fundamentally, just the way the product is shaped, we had one product that we were selling to the marketplace, where, one SKU, if you will. And so I think, the whole notion of WeWork and the notion of, spec space and building out spaces in advance was this notion of kind of creating additional SKUs to service and accommodate the
and it's you were there, the .com bomb, you called it, which I like. Yeah. It doesn't mean all the .coms went away. It means we figured out what one should be there and what the models really should be. And there should be co-working. I think it's essential. There should be pre-built spaces in buildings. That's essential. Companies that are growing and recreating their environments. That's like, so it's all essential. It's just like, what does it look like the next 20 years? And that's what we're all trying to figure out. All right. So John Gray walks in. I guess he bought, this gigantic portfolio and he didn't like his lobbies. Thank God for you. Right. So he walks into your lobby and what does he call you? Like how's this all go down?
A phone call. I get a phone call. It says, hey, come on board and be, the managing.
Did he personally call you?
No, I talked to about a half a dozen people. I met with them later, obviously, to, secure the deal. But
because the story, I was hoping the story was like he's in the lobby, he finds your number, he calls you himself.
He had already left town by the time they got back to me, so I ended up having dinner with a couple of his peeps.
That's great. That's great.
So, So I mean, I think they sort of wanted me to come on board and be a managing director to kind of like sprinkle fairy dust in the portfolio. And I said,
Smart.
I kind of have that job already. Why would I do this? And they were like, what do you mean? So basically I got hired on as a COO and really to
all right. So let me ask you a question, because I this is so important and I don't want you to gloss over that. Why did you change? You like, because you just before said you had the magic position. You had complete autonomy. I mean, I know how creative you are. You had complete creative juices that could flow anywhere you wanted them to go. Why'd you do that?
I think there's a little bit of a new challenge thrown my way, right? So, it actually has to sort of make, career trajectory sense, right? And so the first SVP to MD, I'm like, there's not like, I'm not really like creating a new challenge for myself. I'm just going to kind of come in and sprinkle pixie dust, where I'm at. So that like fundamentally it had to be a different leveled position where I could influence change. Like I am one of those people that has this like guitar, like all of us have a guitar string that just like chimes like inside of us. Right. And inside of me is that thread that's just going change, like change it. Right. And so once it became sort of at the C-suite level, it was this opportunity to influence an entire organization.
And listen, it's a big point. Like, I'm not saying like you shouldn't. I'm just, it's like you wonder why someone makes that decision in a safe place that you created success. So it's not like you had to worry about anything. They had all the resources. You talked about being resourcefulness and having resources. They had everything. But I like that because like what you did is you explained it. And this is what I think people should learn. You were not afraid to change and put yourself in environments that you have to almost start over and recreate yourself.
Well, and I've learned my entire career that anytime you put yourself into a challenging situation, like create the calmness around it, but like pushing through it and finding the edges of it are like these incredible growth moments, right? Like this caused me to grow like nobody's business. I wasn't going to grow in the environment in which I was at. But if I could sort of go and be a part of the largest private equity firm, on the planet that was
I think it's great
around real estate that was different than mine and kind of push along the edges and find the rough points around that was going to be very dynamic to my own growth. And then, the chance of like leading an organization of over 200 people through challenging times was an amazing.
What's also great about you, and I hope people like think about this as a lesson. You weren't looking for it.
No.
You were just doing and being you, creating what you thought was the best thing for where you were. And it came, I call it happenstance. Some people call it hard work brings luck. You can call it whatever you want. But I love that because I think that's where people like sometimes miss the boat. If you're constantly not grateful and searching for something that you don't think you have, it normally doesn't come. When you're just grateful and doing all great things in your mind where you are, boom, something out of nowhere happens. So, all right. So you take this job, right?
Yeah.
And it's
huge.
And
I take it as COO, right? And I start in October. And I'm already seeing, keep in mind, like the organization had, I think it was like 4 CEOs in 5 years. And and honestly, I think like culturally, I walked into an environment, it felt like amazing people that were just like in foxholes, supporting each other, but not able to kind of surface up and be be who they really are.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I felt like I had to do was like create a space of cover, right? And, long ago in my career, and, I lost my parents early in my life, like in my 20s. And I like had very little capital that they had left me. I say capital, money, right? We get used to sort of seeing on the lingo that like by 29, in the early days of e-trading, I had was trading Fannie Mae options because I learned finance, and I kind of parlayed it into like 100K and bought myself a house. And all. So by this time I created what I called financial freedom, or FU money,
Right.
which was I could always stand on my own platform and have strength and not succumb to sort of weakness around what I felt was right. And so I felt that space when I joined Blackstone. I felt that space of actually having sort of the strength of my own feet underneath me, because I didn't need the job. I didn't look for it. And so as a result of that, I could stand and create cover for a group of very talented people and like work from a platform of honesty and truth and front channel everything. And it just radically changed the organization, and people will tell you it takes 7 years to change culture, but when you have a strong leader who gives their people cover, you can change it in under 3. You can change
psychology. It's team. It's like why the best teams. So I'm so sorry with your parents being at an early age. Like, how did that change you? What did that bring to you? Because I can't even imagine what that must have felt like.
Everything. Yeah. It was, I realized, in the moment, like, cause I'm 23, my father dies of a sudden heart attack. And then a year later, my mom dies of a broken heart.
How old was he?
He was 7, because he was, he was 72. So he was 50 when I was born. Right.
Oh, wow. That's right. Oh my God. And then within the year, your mom?
Yeah. My mom dies.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, as a result of that, there's these moments where, at that age, you're super young, and I'm like picking up the phone to sort of share things. I'm like, oh, they're not there. And I was like, wow, wait a minute. I've been living my whole life to please them. Right. And so it was kind of at that like 25 or 24 when I'm actually having my midlife crisis, where it's like, this is not worth it. That's not worth it. Where people have later in their life, because you're sort of like, the line in front of you between, this world and the next world has just gone down. And so you're next, right? Is the sun, right? Is the sun at 20 and you're 20, right? And so I just realized like, okay, you know what? Everything I do has to be intentional and has to be worth it. So at the, age of 24.
Perspective shift, right? A big perspective shift.
Yeah. I started living purposefully. Right. And it was like a big, big deal. And so there was like things that I really did, that I drove, wasn't to please people, but was to do what I felt was right, to influence, to change, to kind of play that little violin, that little guitar string inside me. So those became,
it's like, please the parent, I totally can resonate with that, because I think most of us, our whole lives are trying to still do that. Like, it's the little inner kid in us, right? That needs that. And when obviously at a young age, when that's not there, that's shocking. And but so look what it made you stronger, right? So here you are.
It instigated, survival, independence, drive, ambition, where not everybody will respond that way, but it was definitely my response, and how I navigated my own success, and would I've been successful without that happening? Who knows? This is not the path that I
in a different way or whatever. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think you would have been, but like maybe you would have made different choices, and it would have been something completely there, or maybe it would have taken longer, right? I mean, you sort of had no choice. Like you were put into a place where
all these things have kind of created the foundation of what I stand upon. When I lead an organization, when I communicate to a founder, when I coach mentors, when I help other people, I'm sort of standing on this ground and saying, you could stand on this same ground, and I do think a big piece of sort of designing leadership, if I will, is also having a bit of like creating sort of a financial freedom and an ability to sort of stand on your own 2 feet, because without that, you're going to kind of succumb to sort of a lot of fear in just your environment of not being enough or not having enough or whatever those things are. And once you sort of have your earlier point, the gratitude that I am enough, I have enough.
Yes.
You can, it's an unbelievable
things happen. It like opens up. Yeah. And it's real. It's real. I'm old enough to know now that, and you obviously have experienced it yourself, that is a truth. That's not an if. All right. So you're at Blackstone, you're COO, you rose up very quickly. Why? Why'd that happen? And
I think the leadership change was that, John Gray in the moment could see that I could run the company. And, the skill set of the current CEO was more on an investment front. And I'm a good operator. I'm a good leader. And so it was, in that moment that the organization needed me. And so we made the change. And, I led the organization for 5 years and through a pandemic. And then we sort of agreed to make a shift in December, and I left in February. And largely a lot of that had to do with, I would say what was kind of going on in Blackstone at the time. I came in with a really unbelievable skill of shifting real estate assets. And, at this time, tons of money is coming into BREIT. And really the core challenge is, that a CEO and a CEO team that could actually develop the relationships within the industry to kind of buy portfolios. And that wasn't something I really wanted to do, quite honestly.
Yeah. That's good. Listen, the most important thing is knowing where you can add value and what you want to do, right? Being clear on that.
Yeah.
But exactly. What a great run. And through the pandemic, right? I mean, it's just office in a pandemic. It's just not a good combination, right?
And I would say some of the key learnings, during that period of time was just that, I think with 200 people, scattered across the United States, and, we're all sort of already working remotely, in ourselves, except with our core people in our own office. We would, regularly have sort of all hands calls once a quarter. And, I moved that to every other week. We were having conversations with people because people were really thrown into isolation. And, after the fact, I had people saying to me, I'm really disappointed that you're leaving, Lisa, but more so my wife is really disappointed because you brought her through the pandemic too, which was like, whoa.
100%. Not even everyone was part of everyone's thing at that point in time, right? The family was there. The family was there. So
yeah. And I think the greatest learnings is just how fast you can sort of infuse cultural shifts when you're communicating very fluidly to a team. How you can, how you can inspire and get people to pretty much almost run through a wall with a strong vision. And what I'm seeing today from a leadership perspective in other companies is this sort of split between organizations that are, wanting people to come back to the office from a surveillance perspective. And then the other companies that want or are pulling people in from a support perspective. This is where you're going to come grow and, expand your career, be a part of this vision, be a part of this purpose. Right. So I'm of the support mind over the surveillance mind. And so I spent a lot of time, over these past 5 years, really writing a lot and speaking to, organizations around leadership and how you sort of utilize the office, how we think about, the dynamics of leadership and culture within all of that. And then we started to kind of develop unique office products that sort of satisfied the different needs and the ways in which organizations were going to use office as touchdown space, as hoteling, as conference centers. And so we were iterating on different ideas and helping and creating, platforms for organizations to have a different SKU in terms of how they would use space.
Yeah, we're going to have to figure this out because I agree that we have to be more flexible. I always say the cloud won, thank God for mobility. Could you imagine if even the mid and small size companies went up into the cloud in a way that it would have lagged another 3, 4, 5 years easy, right? Because you're a different person. So am I. We want to change every day. Like we're not happy unless we feel like we're changing. Most people don't want to change. But I think the young people are missing out. I mentor a lot of young people in coming into industry in a few years, blah, blah, blah. A lot of us do. Some of them don't even know how to like act in a meeting. Like I've been asked, like, when I go into this meeting, like, how do I, how do I act? And like, that's not because Zoom screens are not a meeting, and you got to, so I think you can maintain, I don't know, or sustain, I don't know. The jury's out for me. I'm not saying I know what
I think you're saying a couple of really important things. And the thing that, we sort of, if we sort of separate out some of the younger demographic who's just coming out of school, a lot of the kids that are just coming out of school, that are on the West Coast, I find they're moving to New York. And, a lot of that has to do with the fact that New York is more present and in a physical environment working together.
100%.
I think the sort of the middle management folks that were sort of like, carting kids off to soccer practice and trying to navigate all the before and after things and, commuting quite a ways to the office because they wanted the house in the suburbs. But
that's the word, commute. That's really the word.
Yeah. And you raised a really good point, which I don't think like people have really clued into, is that there is a very deep visual apprenticeship that goes on in the office. And it's sort of the subtle knowing that doesn't happen within the 60 minutes of a Zoom call that's been orchestrated on the phone, right? It is all those subtleties about how do you express leadership? How do you express command over a meeting? How do you, all the sort of the visual clues that you can't get in a Zoom meeting that are about building your professional self, right? And
we're going to all figure it out. Even now the city, I mean, we know that office is going to shrink a bit with commoditized product. Class A office space leasing is as good as it's ever been, right? Everyone wants to go to the A+ assets, not even
A+.
Right. But so in the city, if they start converting some of these buildings to resi where now people can afford, I mean, if we really rework this properly, cities could end up being better than they ever were. It's going to take time. And that's where all the younger people are going to want to move. And they're all going to want to work at those companies that have that energetic and vibrant
I mean, it's no different than like our warehouse districts in the 60s, on the advent of sort of, new changes in supply chain and freight and container shipping in the grocery store. We didn't need these warehouse districts that existed. And so they fell fallow and they became sort of places of crime until suddenly the artists gentrify them and they become really cool places to live. And
100%. It's just going to we're in that cycle, right? So now so you left EQ, which you did an amazing job when you were there. And now you're in this, and I know you've always been tech forward. Obviously, we both have a common friend, Michael Beckerman, who we love. CRE Tech, we'll give him a plug. Climate Tech, he's unbelievable. He's the best. And now you're at Sway. And obviously, I've also been involved with technology the last 10 years. Our industry is impossible, right? No one wants to adopt anything that is different than what they do. And what's interesting, I want to hear your view on this. COVID obviously created what's your HVAC system, your air quality, what's your mobility, now do you have EV charging? What's your carbon footprint? Like all these new questions actually came after COVID, but the biggest ones I'm finding from tenants, what kind of food options do you have? Like it's the experience stuff that really, I think what we said starting this conversation is still the most important technology, if you want, whatever the hell we want, or innovation that, and I don't know, I think we'll see a lot of this other stuff, but I'm interested to hear your view on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, if you talk to the majority of real estate owners and they, you approach them around the technological implementation they've had across the portfolio, they're like, we sort of implemented a couple of gizmos, right? No, we'll call them gizmos as opposed to sort of like things that are actually driving real ROI, things that are actually, the financial service sector didn't have a single engineer, probably, a software engineer or developer 5-10 years ago, right? I mean, like even more so now, I think that they're hiring all of the engineering, talent out of Silicon Valley now, just because they're realizing that fintech is really such a strong way in which they're finding new markets and creating new margins. And
Totally.
I believe that if you look at sort of what fintech investment has done, it's sort of mirrored a little bit of the GDP, and the GDP and the fintech sort of like innovations, or I would say the investments, have sort of mirrored the GDP, while, real estate tech or prop tech has been flat. And there are obvious reasons for that, because essentially whenever we make a lot of money, there's really no reason to change, because like, why mess something up that's actually performing incredibly well? Well,
and it's hard. It's hard to make change.
Yeah, it is hard.
Across
Well,
portfolios.
It is hard to make change, because essentially we're incentivized to keep doing the same thing, right?
Yep.
It's capital intensive business. So, but I do think these headwinds of interest rates, these headwinds of, high costs of inflation as it relates to kind of buildable materials and, repositioning assets, whether it be for a new apartment style, or a combination of like a couple of studios into sort of like more largeable units, which are in demand now, or if we're looking at sort of the reconfiguration of, all of these, the costs, the interest rates, all of this is creating pretty strong friction in a category that has had a fairly, easy sale, I will say, or, the last, 10, 15 years. And, as a result of that, whenever we see tensions and we see fractions, we see, people squirming and finding ways of which they can optimize the yield or improve the yield of an asset. And so I think there's really great technology coming forward that's improving the ways in which we take labor out of the model, and true ways of which we're taking labor out of the model, and the guesswork around productizing, or the products that we're going to put in the market as it relates to an apartment. Like, how should we price the units? And I'm seeing some really interesting technology on all of those fronts.
Like all the minutia that waste people's talents.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah. And we still have like probably 95+% of like,
real stuff
that are still paying in checks instead of like ACH, or, monetizing, the rent payments in a way that's digitized, right? So once we start to kind of aggregate all of this into kind of a data platform, and people like putting more of these sort of antiquated tasks that are still on Excel spreadsheets and still by hand, it'll take an enormous amount of labor and greater efficiencies into the product type, and, actually reduce customer friction. There's still a ton of customer friction in all areas of our physical environments, which is just shocking to me, from finding a parking space, which seems like you still have to kind of like, spool in lots, to, just, optimizing your housing selections or vendors or things of that nature. I mean, there's just like a lot of technology that needs to kind of step forward into this space. And
I agree with that when you say friction, right? You're saying people do what they need to do, not what they want to do most of the time, right? Like, you want to sell to someone that they need it, like it's like not life or death, but like it's a critical decision, not like, oh, well, that would be better. And you're right, if things are doing well, it's easy not to make those decisions. So what areas do you see is the areas people should be thinking about when it comes to real estate? Is it like, again, fintech type products that you can bolt on? I mean, I know we have these old accounting systems that are getting better. It's all about the integration of all this stuff, which, I mean, so easy.
I think the sexy, the non-sexy stuff that is actually taking labor out of the model, there's going to be continued stress on the labor market, particularly for, I would say, at property management, property operations. And we're seeing, platforms that are actually automating some of the back end stuff, whether it be, just simple tracking of certificates of insurance and procuring those. I mean, you have to get a certificate of insurance from the delivery person bringing Staples deliveries, right? Every month, right? And so you're like taking these really sort of like mundane tasks that take a lot of time from your staff, and you're automating it. There's also like an unbelievable like lack of information about the expenses that are done across the entire portfolio of assets, whether it just be between, 5 office buildings. You have no idea like who's actually optimizing and do better work from an expense standpoint. And then once you sort of understand the expenditures that are going across an entire portfolio, marketplaces can form. Optimization in the buys can actually happen. But right now, each property manager manager is isolatingly, buying their toilet paper roll by roll. It's sort of crazy, right? So
it
there's
would
just
be great.
ways.
This chat, the chat the chat GBT 3 product. I don't know if you tried it. I tried it. It wrote me a paragraph on a couple of things. It was fascinating how well it did. But it would be nice one day. I don't, where you can go to your accounting system in real estate and say, what did that doorknob cost in that building? And it could find it, scrape your data, and actually give you that answer. Maybe not come back and give you like the perfect, price, but at least it would stop it's the friction of looking and finding all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, once you have enough data, the whole, open AI platform of where it's sort of like enhancing this narrator economy, where in essence, you're not having to search, and kind of purify and clean the data to sort of then ask the what ifs. You can now ask the what ifs, like, hey, what are the releasing spreads that are happening in, on Park Avenue? And is that comparable to anything else in the city? Right. And you're like, boom, right? Yeah, it's comparable to this, that, and the other thing, as opposed to like digging up all that data, right? Yeah. Once you have all the data, this open AI platform allows you to actually narrate your wonder, which I think this is just going to revolutionize not only sort of like work in general, but every industry and every research and development component of every industry, provided that enough of the data exists organized and structured.
Right, but for real estate, right? Yeah, I mean, real estate, it's in your systems. It's in our, we have different systems that bill and, receivables, and it's all there. It's just like you need something that will actually let you ask a question and get an answer without not having to learn every single system that you have. I mean, there's multiple systems that I may not use every day.
It will be the pure integrator. It'll be the pure integrator. I mean, all of us are complaining about like, none of this stuff is integrated and it's such a headache, right? Where it's like, oh, Yardi over here, VTS over here, MRI over here, and none of it ever talks to anybody. And you've got to have someone who's actually pulling it all down and then integrating it in what? Like Excel spreadsheets or maybe a BI tool. But then once you do that, like it will be the narration of it is going to be the future. And those people that actually can do that can optimize the decision-making around a real estate portfolio really fast.
Totally.
And that's happening.
So you think 20 years or what? Are we 20 years away from this?
I mean, have you been watching like how fast, like the OpenAI, just even the stable diffusion, the quality of the images over 6 months? I mean, before it couldn't get it right. And now like it's just high quality perfected images based upon whatever you narrate into the microphone. It's pretty wild. Remarkable. I think this stuff is
it's cool and it's freaky too. It's like, it's a little freaky, right?
So fast. It's pretty exciting. But I do think like, this is going to reshape education too. Like, what do you have to teach kids, right? Because now all of these computers can actually write their papers. So how do you actually teach wonder? How do you teach, querying, right? Because the pure sort of like syntax and structuring sentences and doing research papers, like you're not going to be able to tell if it's the kids or if it's Jasper.
Yeah, that's going to be it. I was talking about that with someone the other day. Like they don't need crib notes anymore. They have the full notes.
It's already happening.
Right? Yeah.
It's already happening. Nuts. And so, our last education system didn't completely like sort of restructure after the post-World War. Now think about in the OpenAI era, how we need to recraft education.
Totally.
And then, how people learn is going to be how they work. Right. And so then the whole sort of like, I think, real estate landscape about, what kind of jobs and how people are going to work in the future, those sorts of like vehicles, that sort of hardware, call it the office, the hardware needs to be thought about to kind of optimize, how people work and, garner value out of that creative product.
Well, we're glad to have you at Sway Ventures thinking about all of this every day to help us real estate people figure out our buildings and our lives moving forward. It's going to be exciting. I think, because of the times we're going in, what you're going to do is going to even make another gigantic impact on our industry like you always do. I want to thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
It's fun when I can actually have a guest on that also has something to do with what I do for a living, which is real estate, which I love. So that was fun. And anywhere people can find you or find more about Sway Ventures if they're interested in learning more? Is it swaywventures.com? What's the website?
Swaybc.com.
Swaybc.com. And obviously you're on LinkedIn and
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram a little less these days.
I know. It's a crazy addiction we all have to get rid of, but
yeah. Exactly.
So thank you so much, and I will see you soon, and Happy New Year.
Thanks for the conversation. Loved it.
Thanks.